The Lavender Shadows. They say time heals all wounds, but for Richard, each ticking second seemed to deepen the chasm of grief. His world had collapsed just 3 weeks prior. His wife, Margaret, his lighthouse in the stormy seas of life, had succumbed to a sudden illness, leaving him adrift in a lifeless ocean of sorrow. Richard woke suddenly in the middle of the night, the echo of a sharp noise ringing in his ears. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust to the darkness, and as they did, he felt a cold shiver crawl up his spine. A quiet creak, creak, creak pierced the night's silence. It was the sound of his study's door swinging slightly ajar, a sound all too familiar to him. Margaret often worked late into the night, poring over books in their quaint, cosy study. The bedsheets felt icy beside him, a stark reminder of his loneliness. He switched on the lamp, casting a warm glow around the room. His eyes fell on an empty glass and a bottle on his bedside table, a bottle he'd been reaching out for every night since her passing. The label read, diazepam, a tool to sedate his restless mind and stave off the shadows of solitude. Pushing back his covers, he shuffled into his slippers, ready to confront the noise that had invaded his tranquility. As he moved through the darkened house, he could hear the creak, creak, creak growing louder, each sound a phantom echo of Margaret's footsteps. It was the melody of her nightly routine, from the bedroom to the kitchen, then to the study, and back again. In the dim moonlight filtering in through the windows, he could see the trail of his life with Margaret. A pile of her books, half read, lay scattered across the table, their vibrant covers bearing witness to her boundless curiosity and zest for knowledge. In the kitchen, a chipped teacup rested on the table, a relic of their shared late-night teas and conversations. The silence felt unbearable. Yet each creak, creak, creak of the study door seemed to amplify his solitude. As he stepped into the study, he saw an untouched notebook on Margaret's desk, her neat handwriting filling the first few pages. It looked like the beginning of a new novel she'd planned to write. A single bright red rose lay beside it, wilting slightly. Its fragrance filled the room, a lingering scent of their last Valentine's Day together. His heart pounded as he approached the door. A shiver ran down his spine, the echoes of Margaret's laughter still dancing in the room. The smell of her rose, her books and her presence all overwhelmed him. He felt the shadow of her absence deep within him, like a gash that no amount of time could heal. As he reached out to quiet the creaking door, he saw it, a silhouette in the doorway. It was slender, like Margaret's, her curls seeming to outline the shadow's head. His breath hitched in his throat, a surreal sense of fear gripping him. His rational mind screamed at him, saying it was a trick of the light, a manifestation of his grief, but his heart wanted to believe otherwise. "Margaret," he whispered into the stillness, his voice echoing in the hollow emptiness of the house. The shadow remained still, its silence amplifying the dread within him. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the open window, sending shivers down his spine. He caught a whiff of a familiar scent that froze him in his tracks, the scent of Margaret's favorite lavender perfume. His heart pounded in his chest, echoing the surreal horror of the situation. Was his mind playing tricks on him? Or was he truly standing face to face with a shadow of his departed wife? The chilling scent of lavender hung in the air, amplifying the eerie aura of the room. He couldn't tear his gaze from the shadow, his heart echoing in his ears with a rapid drum-like rhythm. The silence felt like a tangible entity, pressing in on him from all sides. A soft rustle broke the thick silence. His eyes darted towards the desk where Margaret's notebook lay open. A page flipped over, as if nudged by an invisible hand. It was an unfinished story, a tale she had started but could never complete. Seeing her words again, so vibrant and full of life, sent a fresh wave of grief crashing over him. He turned back towards the shadowy figure in the doorway, a sense of desperation gripping him. "Margaret, is it really you?" he asked again, his voice quivering. The shadow seemed to sway slightly, the eerie silence engulfing his desperate plea. Just then, a sharp gust of wind slammed the study door shut, causing Richard to jump. The figure had disappeared. His heart hammered in his chest as he rushed towards the door, yanking it open, only to be met with the cold emptiness of the hallway. He turned back into the study, his eyes scanning the room. The rose, the notebook, the scent of lavender, all bearing the haunting presence of his beloved Margaret. Retreating back into his bedroom, Richard clung onto the bottle of diazepam, his mind swimming with the chilling encounter. The shadow, the scent of lavender, the flipping pages, all uncanny reminders of Margaret. He took another pill, desperate to drown out the reality that was more terrifying than any nightmare. As he laid down, the house fell silent again, the eerie echoes of his encounter slowly fading. His eyes roved over to Margaret's side of the bed, half expecting to see her there. But all that greeted him was the cold, untouched pillow and the lingering scent of lavender. His eyelids grew heavy as the diazepam began to work its magic. Yet, as he drifted off into a restless sleep, he couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. An icy shiver ran down his spine, the chilling silence of the house echoing his solitude. The last thing he saw before sleep claimed him was a faint shadow flickering at his bedroom doorway, and the soft whisper of Margaret's name hung in the air. Reflections in the dark. It was around 3 a.m. when I woke up, my skin clammy and my mind foggy with remnants of a vivid nightmare. A low growl, incoherent and distant, echoed in my ears. I strained to recognize the source, a restless dog or an overactive imagination, perhaps. Beside me, the sheets were cold, an empty testament to my wife's restless nature. Amelia had always been a night owl. She found solace in the quiet, writing her stories and poems into the early hours. Our apartment was an old one, full of creaks and sighs that danced through the silence of the night. I could hear the faint rustling in the living room, Amelia scribbling away on her typewriter. The distinctive thump of the carriage return was comforting, almost rhythmic. Reaching out, I fumbled for my glasses, a heavy sigh escaping me. Sleep seemed like a distant memory, chased away by the phantom growl that lingered in my subconscious. A dim glow leaked under the bedroom door, evidence of the single antique lamp in our living room that Amelia loved. Deciding to check on her, I padded my way across the room, the chill of the floor biting at my bare feet. The scent of coffee hung in the air, rich and comforting, with a hint of something sweeter, probably the vanilla candles Amelia often burned. I opened the door, the rusty hinges creaking in protest. What greeted me was a scene both eerie and disorienting. The typewriter was humming away, the keys moving with an unnatural rhythm. The papers, usually scattered in creative disarray, were neatly stacked on the side, untouched. The lamp cast long, distorted shadows on the empty chair, but where was Amelia? "Amelia," I called out, the name echoing in the vacant space. Silence answered back, thick and haunting. An unsettling sensation gripped me, a cold dread that tightened around my heart. I searched for a logical explanation, tried to banish the creeping fear. Maybe she'd gone out, taken a walk to clear her mind. It wouldn't be the first time. But the city was dangerous at this hour, and the notion didn't sit right with me. I felt a lump in my throat. A voice in my head whispered, "Something isn't right." To the kitchen, then. She might be there brewing another pot of her midnight coffee, but the kitchen too was silent, untouched. No steaming coffee pot, no tinkling of spoons, nothing. The apartment felt different off somehow. The familiar noise of the typewriter, the rustling of papers, even the faint scribble of a pencil. They all seemed strange and unnerving now. Suddenly, the low growl echoed again, closer now. I could hear it clearly, a rasping sound like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. It came from the direction of Amelia's study. An ice-cold chill ran down my spine. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Who was in the apartment with me, and where was Amelia? Then, from the dimly lit hallway, a figure emerged. The sight sent shivers down my spine. It was a man, tall and looming, his face obscured by the shadows. He held something in his hand, a large, dark object that glinted ominously under the faint light. What was happening? Who was this man? And why was he in our apartment? I had so many questions, my mind racing, fear gripping at me, threatening to tear me apart. Suddenly the figure turned towards me, and our eyes met. The intensity in his gaze was terrifying, and that's when I noticed his eyes. They were familiar, too familiar. They were my own eyes. It was like looking into a mirror. My reflection, my doppelganger, stood before me, an eerie twin down to the last detail. He, or should I say I, stared at me, a strange mix of emotions in his eyes. The chill of terror that seized me was unlike anything I'd ever felt. As he moved closer, the smell hit me. It was the smell of freshly brewed coffee, mixed with something else, the sweet scent of vanilla candles, my wife's candles. This wasn't just an intruder, it was something much more sinister. A terrifying realization hit me as I backed away, my own gaze locked onto the figure moving towards me. Just then, a piercing scream tore through the silence, shaking me to my core. The scream of a woman, Amelia. It echoed through the apartment, shattering the stillness and sending shards of terror straight into my heart. The figure before me smiled, an eerily familiar smile that was far from comforting. His gaze never left mine as he stepped back into the darkness of the hallway, disappearing into the shadows. What had I just seen? What had just happened? And where was Amelia? I had to find her, had to make sure she was all right. But first, I had to gather the strength to move, to break away from the paralyzing fear. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I could feel it. But little did I know, the night had only just begun. Fueled by adrenaline and the fear of losing Amelia, I forced myself to move. My own apartment, which once felt like a safe haven, now seemed like a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. I turned towards the direction from which the scream had echoed, each step harder than the last. The temperature seemed to drop with every passing second, leaving me shivering. The hallway leading to Amelia's study was unusually dark, the single overhead bulb flickering intermittently. With each blink of the dim light, the figure seemed to flash before me, a ghostly spectre superimposed onto reality. Reaching the study, I paused, my heart thudding in my chest like a war drum. The rasping sound was louder here, a horrible undertone to the silence that hung in the air. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. Amelia's study was in chaos. Books were strewn across the floor, their pages torn and scattered. The typewriter lay smashed in a corner, its keys scattered like tiny teeth. But Amelia was nowhere to be seen. Where was she? My stomach churned at the thought of her in distress. I turned to leave when a glint of something under the desk caught my eye. Bending down, I reached out and pulled it into the light. It was a small gold locket, Amelia's favorite, the one I'd given her on our anniversary. She never took it off. My mind raced, a vortex of worry and dread. Something terrible had happened, and I was left clutching at straws with no idea how to proceed. The shadowy figure, the replica of me, what did it want? And more importantly, where had it taken Amelia? Suddenly, the growl echoed again, louder this time, sending a shudder down my spine. It was coming from the living room. But it wasn't just a growl anymore. It sounded like laughter, a deep, bone-chilling laughter that resonated through the apartment, rattling my nerves. I sprinted back to the living room, each step echoing my mounting fear. The laughter grew louder, transforming into a guttural howl that shook the very air. As I arrived, I came face to face with my own figure standing in the middle of the room. In his hands was the object I'd seen earlier, a large, worn-out book. My doppelganger tossed the book onto the coffee table, and as it fell open, I recognized it. Amelia's personal journal. She wrote her deepest thoughts and secrets in it, things she'd never share with anyone, not even me. My double spoke, his voice a twisted echo of mine. You should take a look. It's quite enlightening. confusion and terror tangled within me. I glanced at the journal, then back at the figure that wore my face. The apartment was silent again, the laughter gone. Only the deep, heavy breaths of my sinister twin filled the air. And so I was left with the journal, the laughing spectre, and a sea of questions. One thing, however, was crystal clear. I needed to find Amelia, and I had to face my own worst enemy to do so. As the figure in the room faded back into the shadows, I steeled myself for what was to come. It was only the beginning, and a long, terrifying night lay ahead. Shaking, I reached out and picked up Amelia's journal, my hand trembling as I turned to the first page. My eyes skimmed the familiar handwriting, the lovingly inked words recounting our shared memories, her dreams, her fears. But as I flipped further, the entries changed, growing darker, filled with worry and apprehension. She wrote about seeing me, or rather a version of me, lurking in the shadows, watching her. It didn't interact with her, just observed. Amelia was frightened, but she also felt a strange kinship towards this figure. He was, after all, a reflection of the man she loved. Every entry, each encounter, painted a picture of a woman grappling with the unknown, teetering on the edge of fear and fascination. I felt a twinge of guilt for not having noticed her distress earlier. The last entry was different. It was hurried, the words barely legible, as if she'd been in a rush or afraid. She'd decided to confront the doppelganger, to demand answers. That was it. No date, no time, just the plan. A cold realization washed over me. Amelia hadn't just disappeared, she was taken. Resolved to find her, I got up, tucking her journal safely into my pocket. The apartment was silent again, but the deafening echo of the figure's laughter still rang in my ears. I needed to prepare, to arm myself against whatever was out there. The question was, how do you fight yourself? As I rummaged through our things, looking for anything that could serve as a weapon, I came across an old flashlight. It was a relic from our camping days, heavy and sturdy. Not ideal, but it would have to do. With the flashlight in hand, I ventured back into the darkened hallway. My heart pounded in my chest, but the need to find Amelia overpowered the crippling fear. I was venturing into the unknown, chasing shadows in the dark. I moved towards the basement door. It was the only place in the apartment I hadn't checked. The door creaked open, revealing a flight of wooden stairs descending into darkness. The flashlight's beam cut through the murkiness, landing on the dust-laden floor below. The basement was eerily quiet, save for the distant drip of water from an old pipe. I descended slowly, each step squeaking under my weight. My pulse roared in my ears as I reached the bottom. Suddenly, I heard it again. The low, rumbling laughter, bouncing off the damp walls, rising like a monstrous crescendo. A shadow began to form in the farthest corner, slowly taking on a human shape. It was him, or rather me. A chilling silence fell over the basement, the laughter dying down to a menacing whisper. My double stepped into the beam of my flashlight, his eyes meeting mine, but there was something different in his gaze this time. Anticipation. "What do you want?" I managed to choke out, my grip tightening on the flashlight. He smiled, that unnerving reflection of my own. To exist. To live. The realization hit me like a punch. He wasn't just a doppelganger, he was a manifestation of my own fears, my insecurities. He was me, just the darker, neglected part of me, and he had Amelia. "Why Amelia?" I demanded, anger seeping into my voice. His eyes flickered. "She's the key, the link between us." The fight was inevitable. To save Amelia, I had to confront myself, my own fears. It was no longer just about finding my wife, but facing the darkness within me. The night was far from over. It was a battle for existence, a fight against my own reflection. Whispers of the departed. I woke up in a cold sweat, the remnants of a nightmare still clinging to my mind like spiderwebs. The room was shrouded in darkness, and a sense of foreboding washed over me. My heart raced as I strained my ears, trying to make sense of the muffled sounds that echoed through the house. They were faint but unmistakable, whispering against the cold tiles of the kitchen. My body tensed, and a wave of unease washed over me. Why were there footsteps in my house in the dead of night? Panic clawed at my chest, urging me to investigate, but a part of me hesitated, fearing what I might find. As I reached out to my side, I felt the empty space where my wife should have been. The bed was cold. She must have been awake for a while. Her absence only heightened my anxiety, and I yearned for her familiar presence, the comfort of knowing I wasn't alone in this eerie night. With a trembling hand, I fumbled for the lamp on my bedside table. Knocking over a small bottle, the sound of pills rattling against the floor startled me. Confusion swept over me as I realized they were sleeping pills, but I had never suffered from insomnia. They belonged to my wife, not me. The shuffling footsteps continued, now moving from the kitchen to the living room. I had become familiar with this nocturnal ritual of my wife's, a nightly search for solace amidst her troubled thoughts. But tonight was different. The steps were no longer careful, instead producing a harsh, scraping sound against the carpet. Summoning all my courage, I turned on the lamp, banishing the shadows to reveal the room's familiar contours. My eyes fell upon my wife's vanity, a once neatly arranged space now in disarray. The makeup and silver brushes I had given her were strewn across the floor, including the cherished necklace I had gifted her on our 30th anniversary. Confusion washed over me. Why had my wife gone to bed without tidying up? As I picked up the fallen pill bottle, its weight suggested that it had been recently emptied. Memories swirled in my foggy mind, like fragments of a forgotten puzzle. I remembered my wife's tears, her face streaked with black eyeliner and rouge, ruining the carefully applied makeup. In a fit of despair, she had swept everything off the vanity, shattering the delicate balance of our shared memories. But then it hit me, a chilling realization that froze my blood. I remembered standing in a cemetery, watching as her polished wooden coffin descended into the earth. Bernard's funeral. My funeral. A strange odor permeated the air, a scent reminiscent of the flowers that had adorned my wife's funeral. It clung to the figure standing in the doorway, his face hidden in darkness. Dread coiled within me as I recognized myself, or rather, my spectre, haunting my wife's grieving mind. The footsteps ceased, and I yearned for them to resume, to break the silence that threatened to suffocate me. But instead, my silhouette remained, a painful reminder of my absence. I longed to console my wife, to tell her that I was at peace, but the words were lost to me, trapped in the void between the living and the dead. In that moment, the realization struck me. Our connection, once so strong, had been severed by death's cruel embrace. My wife's grief had given birth to a spectre that would forever haunt her, leaving her trapped in a purgatory of sorrow and longing. As I stared at her, my heart ached with the desire to reach out, to comfort her, but I remained an ethereal figure, forever bound to the memories of our past. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and recognition, and whispered my name in a voice that pierced my soul. But I could only watch, a silent spectre in the night, as she grappled with her own grief and the unyielding presence of my ghostly apparition. Her voice trembled as she mustered the strength to speak again, her words barely audible in the heavy silence. "Bernard, is it really you?" I wished desperately to respond, to reassure her, but my ethereal form rendered me incapable of uttering a single word. My existence had transformed into a cruel paradox, a presence without a voice, a spirit without the ability to console the woman I loved. Her gaze never wavered, her eyes searching for any sign, any confirmation that I was still somehow with her. And in that moment, the room seemed to flicker with an otherworldly energy. A chilling breeze whispered through the air, causing the hairs on the back of her neck to stand on end. She shivered, sensing a presence beyond the boundaries of her understanding. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. A sinister aura enveloped the room, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The familiar sounds of footsteps echoed once more, but this time they were accompanied by an eerie laughter that chilled her to the bone. It was a sound devoid of joy, a cacophony of malevolence that echoed through the depths of her soul. The spectre before her began to contort, its form twisting and warping in a grotesque display of supernatural power. The room grew colder, as if the very essence of fear had seeped into its foundation. Whispers filled the air, faint voices carried on the wind, taunting and tormenting her senses. Her heart pounded against her ribcage, the terror threatening to consume her. She clutched at her chest, struggling to catch her breath as the room spun around her. The world seemed to blur, the boundaries of reality and nightmare merging into a sinister tapestry. Then, with a surge of adrenaline, she found her voice. Defiance cut through the fear as she screamed, "Get out! Leave me alone!" The malevolent presence recoiled, the air crackling with an unseen force. The oppressive energy dissipated, leaving only a lingering sense of unease. The spectre, once my form, began to fade, its presence diminishing until it was nothing more than a faint whisper of the past. As the last traces of the supernatural presence vanished, she collapsed to the floor, her body trembling with exhaustion. Tears streamed down her face, a mixture of relief and grief merging into a torrent of emotions. Months passed, and the memory of that fateful night haunted her dreams. She sought solace in the embrace of friends and family, in the warmth of the morning sun, but the spectre's visitation had left an indelible mark on her soul. In time, she learned to live with the spectre of loss, to find strength in the memories we had shared. She came to understand that love could transcend the barriers of life and death, and that even in the darkest of nights there is always a glimmer of hope.